This episode is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use cardkingdom.com/studies to help support the show and pick up magic cards, magic accessories, etc. All right, here we go. Before we begin, I'd like you to remember that all of this is an illusion. One of the guiding questions you can ask yourself when viewing a drawing or a painting or a photograph is, how legible is this piece? By legible, I mean how well does the composition communicate its message? Are the forms arranged in such a way that the viewer doesn't have to put in the legwork to understand its intent? Are the forms clear? Is this legible? Can it be read? With these ink drawings, I want you to pay attention to just how quickly you can recognize all of the subjects in the frame. It doesn't take much time or effort to understand what is going on in each sketch. Your brain builds upon all the visual information stored prior in order to reconstruct the illusion at just a quick glance. This piece, titled Shove, is highly legible, even with multiple subjects and planes of field at play. The expressive and exaggerated forms of the two guys pushing the car up front, combined with the deep perspective warping from midground to background, sells the idea right away. It's a sunny day along the countryside, and these vagabonds are out of gas. This piece, called Better Times, also taps into our collective imagination. It's a late night at the bar, where the lost and lonely retell their tales of days past, while the younger gent tries his luck with the lady in the back. With just a few quick lines, we can make out the form of the bartender. He isn't important to this scene. His back is turned, which pushes our eye to the central figure, who is framed by his friends and the array of bottles above. These drawings all sell their scenes with just two values. There is very little gray present on the page. Balancing deep blacks and bright whites is the gentle game an ink draftsman must play, and the resulting compositions must always be legible. Otherwise, the illusion is lost. I lead with these drawings because they lend great insight into how Sidharth Chaturvedi composes his scenes. They are all fairly complex arrangements, but they maintain a high level of legibility, which allows the viewer to never lose sight of what the artist is trying to say. These elements are present in Sid's paintings as well. But something more charming emerges when color is applied. Some charismatic aura that blends into and enhances the illusion. Sidharth Chaturvedi, or Sid for short, is a Munich-based fantasy illustrator and the subject of today's artist study. His work is extremely strong and his talents exceptional, and like all the other illustrators I've looked at on this channel, his portfolio has a lot to teach us about the craft. In 2008, Sid graduated from the University of Miami with a BA in Art and Art History, then took his skills to the Academy of Art University in San Francisco to finish an MFA in painting in 2011. Since then, in less than 10 years' time, he's become prolific in the industry, working for a long list of big-name clients like Riot, TinyCo, and Facebook. He landed his main gig in 2014 as a concept artist with Deep Silver, one of the larger game publishers in Europe. And just before that, Sid connected to art director Mark Winters with a, quote, stray comment on Facebook about putting a magic portfolio together. We're lucky that he did. Kaladesh in 2016 was Sid's debut as an illustrator for Wizards of the Coast. I remember seeing Thriving Ibex for the first time, and now with the clarity of retrospect, thinking that this artist would be special. When paired with its companion piece from the same set, we can start seeing how colors can communicate mood and enhance legibility. The Ibex, for example, is playing with nearly the same tones as the swirling clouds in the background. The light blues in the sky and the bright green grass give the piece a lot of airiness. The palette tells us that this creature is venerated. In contrast, the crocodile matches the dark purples of the swampy mist behind it. The green water in the foreground is far from inviting, and the gentle treatment of the waves falling off the ridges of its back give this piece such a painterly feel. I especially like the choice in composition here. Nearly all of the crocodiles in Magic exaggerate the maw, but Sid's creature is moving away from the frame. It's eerier in this regard. It's much quieter, too. Both of these pieces are digital works, but they employ the same elements found in oil painting in their textures and minimal palettes. In browsing Sid's self-curated thread of artists he looks towards for inspiration, we can see the masterworks he's referencing to guide his drafts. Giants like Howard Pyle, J.C. Leyendecker, Norman Rockwell, and Dean Cornwell will of course always be in the canon of modern illustration. But Sid's studies go much deeper than that. Italian illustrator Walter Molino, for example, is on the list, who has an expert way of balancing large crowds and high-speed movement. Chinese artist Xiaoming Wu is here as well, whose gentle color palette lets light do all the heavy lifting. Sometimes Sid includes bits of trivia in this thread, like with his post on Mark Tennant. Mark is why I can draw competently, and why I have any discipline whatsoever. He used to start class by showing us Russian student drawings and saying, "That's your competition when you graduate." This thread is a must-follow for anyone who loves insight into an artist's perspective on valuable work. It's also a testament to Sid's dedication to painting. In fellow artist and friend Andrew Marr's words, "I've known Sid for about a decade now, and he is by far the most studious artist I've ever met. Even now, after being out of school for so long, he's constantly doing studies in painting from life to continuously hone his skill." Since his debut in Magic, Sid has redefined that skill and has chiseled out a distinct identity from the niche. In his digital and oil paintings, we can see a few characteristic elements that make his work immediately recognizable and fully his own. Crowds, for example, are notoriously difficult to balance in painting. It's tough enough to keep proportions and poses in place for one full-body portrait, but giving enough room to each character in the scene to occupy their own space without disrupting the balance is a challenge all its own. We can start simple with Avon Windguide as an example, which has this elegant triangle shape keeping the figures tied together. I especially like this diagonal here, because it adds a nice geometric element to the scene to keep it from getting stale. It also, of course, tells us these characters are on a roof, which harmonizes with the card's mechanics. Sid's posing is very evocative. The exaggerated torso and flowing wings add movement to the scene and give gravitas to the most important character. In contrast, the two other figures are firmly grounded and parallel each other's posture. So that's 3 figures. What about 5? Camaraderie is fully balanced too, and leans into a heroic ensemble trope to communicate its message. Looking at diagonals again, we can draw a couple of lines here to show an underlying trident shape. The hammer and longbow jet out together to the left, and the curled hoof matches the trajectory of the wolf's head on the right. Our central figure, once again, is given more importance because of the characters around her. There are no competing lines or moods. Everything works in service to the theme of the piece. Now, both of these examples are essentially still frame portraits, but what happens when we throw a ton of motion into the mix and even more figures? Here's Rampage of the Clans from Ravnica Allegiance. This time, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characters in the frame. Given the constricting nature of just how small Magic cards are, going for this many subjects is almost unheard of and probably heavily discouraged. Sid knows this though, so he keeps the scene constrained to essentially 2 values, which harkens back to those ink drawings we looked at the beginning. Each character can be read by their exaggerated poses. The jubilant centaur is celebrating the toppling of this giant statue, the 2 in front of him are pushing the mob forward to further the destruction, and the innocent bystanders are protecting their child in desperation. Despite the mayhem, you can read all of this. Everything is balanced and kept to the essential. So let's turn this up to 11. This piece is masterful. Everything is suspended in motion. It feels more theatrical than expository, not just because of the costuming, but also because of the horizontal layering of the composition. This is a scene from the stage. It's one of Andrew Marr's favorite pieces. It's one of mine, too. In his Commander 2017 art review, Mike Linneman pointed out how the candelabra in the background help divide the action into quadrants. Each section has a clearly defined character in the foreground and a silhouetted prop or outline of more fighters behind them. There's a reference here, too, to a well-known 1850 Bouguereau painting titled Dante and Virgil in Hell. But despite the gratuitous violence, it's a fairly comedic composition. I suppose it works hand in hand with the word goad, a keyword that always makes me grin. I asked Sid what the process was behind this piece, and he said, "I wanted a touch of comedy. I do that a lot in my more violent pictures now that I think about it. Pulling the camera back lets you watch in horror, but you also have to chuckle a little. I mean, it's a food fight." Then there's that reference to Bouguereau's Dante and Virgil in there. Listen, I love that painting, but partly because it's ridiculous. That's hard to avoid when you turn the violence up to 11 like that. It becomes theatrical instead of dramatic. There's a fine line. I doubt I'd have to put those figures in a picture that was supposed to be terrifying. It's true, too. Sid's darker pieces always have a candid element of humor mixed in. Drillbit's another card that, top to bottom, pokes fun at how excessive its own violence is. Here, once again, we can find a minimal use of values and tones. The lighting from above lends a sculpture-like quality to the folds in the victim's clothes, and the hellish hands holding him up. It's a digital piece that abides to the same rules as real paint, which gives it a beautiful, organic feel. And again, it's highly legible. Demon of Catastrophes is another favorite of mine, perhaps even my number one. It's an oil piece on panel that perfectly depicts an abstract concept in just 4 or 5 colors. The brushstrokes are clearly visible and relatively thin here in the rocks, as well as in the silhouettes in front, and the light blues pull the shape of the beast out of the cloudy sky in the background. It feels effortless. The Italians have this word sprezzatura, a studied carelessness, and I see it in Sid's work here. I'd be remiss to not mention the gentle nod to 1940 Fantasia, too, in which the demon Chernobog awakens from a mountainside to the sound of an angry orchestra. The figure in front even looks like Mickey conducting the score. But more than a cheeky reference to old-school Disney, this piece has a mood. It's very unusual in its composition. How often do we get creature commissions in which the subject itself is hidden in the background? Demons especially tend to be depicted mid-flight, with wings spread and embodying the extremely grotesque. Sid's demon, though, is pretty minimal. He's essentially a human man with horns. And with his face placed at the very top edge of the frame, we focus instead on the environment he occupies. This painting is less a demon and more a circumstance involving one. It pushes more towards a feeling rather than a description. I find that a lot in Sid's work. Along with group compositions, he's got a knack for blending in the abstract with concrete images. I almost bought Blind Blast at auction, and I wish I did, because it just has this element of mystery to it. Like the demon, it's working with that minimal, nearly two-tone palette. There's just something about it, though. I'd like to wrap up this video by looking at a few of Sid's recent pieces that bring together all the elements we've looked at in this study. The first is Daring Archaeologist. It's another oil piece that challenges conventions with this unnerving camera angle. It also keeps our eye in place by highlighting the face of the rock with the same tones as the climber's hood. The rest of the rock is kept in the shadows so that our eye stays firmly in place at the center of the frame. The point of tension is right there in the tiny crevice where their fingers are locked in place. You'll notice that this hand is far more detailed than the other, which guides the narrative. Once again, Sid employs a strong diagonal that stretches from corner to corner, and the abstract spaces in the background push against the climber and emphasize their struggle. Consider how much safer this painting feels if we rotate it 90 degrees. It loses almost all of its drama when the risk of falling is removed. These are the type of decisions that separate good paintings from great ones. Pouncing Lynx is another great painting that Sid considers some of the best bit of composing he's done so far. Remnants of Norman Rockwell are alive in this piece, and so is every single character in the frame. It's an oil painting that deserves to be seen at scale because it has everything in it. Ravnican architecture floating in the background to place us on that plane, a mob of unsettled citizens who are clearly terrified of the stray cat, and a pair of piercing eyes that make the viewer feel like they are the victim of its hunt. This wall here is exaggerated and adds motion to the already hyperactive scene. Consider this though, oils take a really long time to dry. Sid didn't have to go this hard in the paint for a magic card. Just this section of the scene would have sufficed. But much like Stephen Belladin, he has that undying work ethic and love for his craft that elevates his work from acceptable to exceptional. And lastly, this guy. Much like the Lynx, this painting lives at a rarity that doesn't get a lot of attention. The demon here is a token in a corset, yet it deserves the optics of a box-topper planeswalker. These yellows and grays have a Frazetta feel to them, but the textures and detailing are all Sid. Once again, the most intricate section of the piece is where he wants us to look first, with everything becoming gradually less defined the further we move away from that point. And much like Disrupt Decorum, there's kind of a fun element of humor here. Something about that grimace is equal parts menacing and silly. This guy's cheesing on us. His bone necklace is the bling to the collection of skulls beneath him. Even the wings look more like curtains than skin. He's the perfect villain from a musical, much like the one from that animated film nearly a century ago. I asked Sid why he likes the art that he does, if there was some technical element at play, or if he gravitated towards a certain tradition or style. He said, "I love pictures that cast a spell on you, that have a core idea that hits you forcefully, all at once, before you even know what you're looking at. They suggest far more than they actually show you on the canvas, and they stay in your mind forever. To support Sid directly, follow the links below and pick up a print or a playmat. You can also keep up with his work on Instagram and Twitter, or leave a nice message to him in the comments of this video. To support my work directly, pick up a coffee mug from my store. Use the coupon code SID for $5 off. I'm also on Patreon and Twitter, and I just redesigned my website, so check that out at risticstudies.com. Okay, here's Mike with camaraderie from his personal collection.
I'm VorthosMike. You are now in my guest room. Behind me, camaraderie. It's the known associate work. You'd see me in my guest room if you're a known associate. So obviously, as soon as this piece came out, I'm like, gotta have that in the room. Piece by Sidharth Chaturvedi, oil on canvas piece, larger than average size, as you can see, about a hand-sized wig. Beautiful icon of all the things Selesnya. Different humanoids there. Iconic, heroic view instead of the motion-based or scene that Sid is very much known for. Standing atop the rock is normally led for planeswalkers, but here he really deconstructs that to say, what does the Selesnya represent? It represents these humanoids, it represents this architecture with greenery coming out the top, Hanging Gardens of Babylon idea, if you will, the 7 wonders of the world. And it really allows you to see some of the costuming, from the armor on the shoulders to some of the pleating on some of the clothing of the dryads and so forth. I think it's a beautiful piece. Happy to own it. Playmats are going to be coming out soon. There's prints available. Lovely piece, and really shows any Selesnya member really what do they represent.